Welcome to the Boise Metro Chamber's Higher Education Series. I'm Holly Cook, your host from the Chamber. In the Higher Ed series, we aim to discuss important topics facing higher education right here in Idaho. And on today's episode, we're talking about artificial intelligence in higher ed. We'll talk about technology innovations like ChatGPT, machine learning, and how they've changed the landscape in education and in our workforce. We'll be joined by this expert panel, which includes a college student, a computer science professor, an associate dean, and a law school professor, all from Idaho's colleges and universities. Hey, everybody. Those higher ed institutions represented today on this panel are all valued members of the Boise Metro Chamber, which is Idaho's only five-star accredited Chamber of Commerce. This exciting conversation is brought to you today by the generous support of our presenting sponsor, Sparklight. And we're incredibly grateful for their support of this series, as well as Ideal, Idaho's college savings program, for sponsoring today's episode. Some of you may have heard of ChatGPT, but aren't quite sure what it can do. So before we begin the discussion, we just want to give you a brief overview of this exciting technology.
What is ChatGPT? It's a language model created and trained through machine learning. It comes from a company called OpenAI. You can access it by signing up for an account at chat.openai.com. It's just one of many artificial intelligence models available, and for now, it's free. AI technology innovations like ChatGPT are changing the world as we know it in quite a dramatic way. So what can it do? Well, I asked ChatGPT to write a 500-plus word essay about the Federalist Papers. I got very specific, just like you might have a writing prompt in any class. I asked it to include quotes and compare concepts to modern-day political issues. Within a minute flat, I had a high-quality 664-word essay I was able to copy and paste into Microsoft Word. The technology has become so advanced that sometimes it's undetectable. It's even been the subject of several local news articles. Parents and educators are starting the discussion about whether using ChatGPT at school is considered plagiarism or cheating. AI innovations like ChatGPT are everywhere, and it's something academics simply can no longer ignore. Generative AI could likely change education and ultimately the workforce forever. In fact, we're already seeing it change the workforce. Some companies have implemented AI technology for writing code, customer support, copywriting, and more, leading them to lay off workers. In a recent survey by Resume Builder, nearly half of U.S. companies who responded say they replaced at least some workers with AI, and nearly all of them cited significant cost savings for doing so. When asked if they would continue to lay off workers by the end of the year, 33% of leaders who responded said definitely, and 26% said probably. So what does this mean for higher education? Are students using ChatGPT? Are colleges and universities embracing it, or are they banning it? We'll start the discussion right here in Idaho with this expert panel, which includes a college student, a computer science professor, a law school professor, and an associate dean, all from local colleges right here in Idaho.
There's so much to discuss today, and we want to dive right in. So I'd love to introduce our first panelist, Rakeb Abraham Jebessa. Welcome, Rakeb.
Thank you for having me.
We're so thrilled to have you. So you know a little bit about Rakeb. She is from Addis Ababa, which is the capital city of Ethiopia, and she's a sophomore at the College of Idaho. She's majoring in computer science and minoring in Spanish with specializations in data science and marketing. Rakeb loves learning new languages, and she currently speaks English, Amharic, Korean, and Spanish. She's self-taught, by the way, in Korean, which is so cool, and still learning Spanish. Thanks again for being part of this panel. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you.
So ChatGPT is still a new phenomenon for most of us, but how commonplace is it for someone like you who's majoring in computer science and as a current college student?
Well, people who I speak to, like in my department in computer sciences, like for example, like the students and friends that I have, I would say it's pretty common amongst the students there. When it comes to faculty members, from what I've heard, it's also pretty common, just to aid in their learning and all that stuff.
That's awesome. Are professors using it at all, or just students, do you think?
I'm not entirely sure, but I would hear, like I would watch like different resources where professors are using it to like generate topic ideas for classrooms and like uh, ways to engage different kind of activities so that they could help in the way that they deliver their teachings and like classroom settings and such.
Very cool. What are some ways that you're using it in school or your personal life, you and your classmates?
Well, for me, I would say I use ChatGPT as a like my own personal tutor. For example, would be learning very big concepts. For example, like machine learning and computer science, and the book would explain in a very difficult way, like with like big languages, and then I would be like, I don't understand this thing, and then I just go to ChatGPT and I ask it like, can you explain? It's like one of my favorite ways to ask is like, can you explain machine learning as if you're explaining it to a 5 year old? So when it does that, it kind of it's like, okay, sure, and then it explains it in a very easy way, like, oh, imagine a toy box and imagine putting this type of like toys in this kind of box, and like it kind of like with that simple terms, it sets you up to understand and the like the deeper layers of that topic, and I truly enjoy in that manner. Also, like for example, I'm planning to like deepen my knowledge in certain areas in computer science, for example, like the data science or different topics. And then I want to learn it, but then I don't know where to start and I don't know which resources to go to. And I'll just go to ChatGPT and say, hey, can you create a personalized study guide or like a study schedule so that I could understand this topic very deeply in about 6 months and such. And then it would just be like, okay, week one, here's the topic you will focus on, and here are the resources. And I would say like the response that you get from ChatGPT is as detailed as your question. So you could just be like, can I have a study guide or a study schedule for this topic? It'd just be like, it wouldn't know which time limit or like time constraint that you have, so it would not give you as much detail as you want it to be. But if you're like in 6 months and then resources that help to like practice and like projects and such like that, it would be like, okay, here are the list of things that I could provide you. And I think it's pretty cool.
That's very cool. I would have thought of that. That's awesome.
Okay.
So in the introduction, there was, the paper was written. Do you think that that is something that should be an allowable use? Do you think that's going to change how college classes are, or do you think there are certain ways you should use ChatGPT?
Well, I can't entirely speak for like essay wise and such, but I know for like the pros for using ChatGPT as a student, that like it helps in not taking a lot of your time. That would, like, for example, if you're looking for resources, it would kind of save like 30 minutes of your time. It would just because you would give it a personalized way of like, oh, kind of have this type of topic by this professor or by this type of philosopher and such. So I'd say like for using for your resources and kind of aiding your learning, it's pretty great. However, in my personal opinion, I know that I can't speak for everyone, but if we have classes in, for example, in STEM or like in computer science classes, challenges that we face in courses are opportunities for us like to strengthen our neural networks and like to simply critically think. Um, and if we're just going to ChatGPT when like in the first phase of problem, when we face a problem, and if we're just like asking ChatGPT and if we're getting the answers, then I feel like that hinders our ability to like yeah, as I mentioned, like to strengthen your neural networks and like and to increase your critical thinking skills, because those courses are designed to be challenging because they want to increase your like problem solving skills. So like in terms of STEM, that's what I think. But however, in just writing essays, I for me like specifically, I would say I wouldn't do it because that takes away like your thinking skills and like your thoughts and your own opinion, which really matters when it comes to like school settings and such. Um, yeah.
That's really critical, I think. I mean, and that's probably a pun because it's critical thinking, right? But it really is important to realize that you have to have that base level of understanding and use it to enhance what you know. So if we have high school kids or middle school kids watching this, coming from you, what do you recommend in terms of ChatGPT or other machine learning? How would you advise them as another student or a peer of sorts to use machine learning?
I would say, to use it the way that I kind of use it, which is as a tutor, to help you understand concept, to enhance what you know, and just like support you in the way that you learn things instead of just using it as a tool to answer all of your questions. Like any other technology, there are the pros and cons, and its efficiency is as much as like the way that you use it, and it's entirely up to you. But you could use it to your advantage if you're using it as a way to, as I mentioned, like enhance all that you know. And if you are not in the position to get a tutor in that moment, for example, like if I'm studying, like my personal example is if I'm studying at 2 a.m. and I don't know who to reach out about like a certain concept, I'll just ask ChatGPT, please explain this to me as if I'm 5. And I say, don't give me the answers. That's what I like to say, because I don't want to know the answers. I want it to help me think, that's the personal experience. And yeah, I would say use it as your personal tutor. It's really helpful.
That's great advice. Thank you so much. I wish we had like an hour with each of you, but we've got to move on to the next panelist. We'll come back to you at the end here as well. But before we move on, we want to thank our presenting sponsor of this higher ed series, which simply would not be possible without their generous support. Sparklight is invested in our community and they have a great deal for you. So before we hear from the next panelist, let's check out this quick offer from Sparklight.
Your spring just got a lot greener. Switch to Sparklight's award-winning internet and save on speeds up to a gig with our lightning-fast, fiber-fueled network and proven 99.9% reliability. You can stream smoother, game faster, and work smarter. Plus, you'll get more out of all your devices with our guaranteed whole-home Wi-Fi and unlimited data included. Don't miss out on our spring sale. Call or scan the code today to take advantage of our lowest price ever and free installation.
Thank you so much, Sparklight. Here at the Chamber, we try to support other Chamber members all the time, whenever possible, and we hope you will too. So be sure to sign up for Sparklight services today. We're excited to introduce our next panelist, Dr. Leslie Kerby. Dr. Kerby is an associate professor of computer science at Idaho State University and serves as affiliate faculty in nuclear engineering. Her research group, SEEDS, which stands for Computational Engineering and Data Science, focuses on designing and building data-driven modeling and simulation software. Projects include scientific machine learning for nuclear reactor operations and monitoring, scientific machine learning for lithium-ion battery performance and quantum chemistry, and the security of machine learning systems as applied to nuclear technology. Wow, I think it's safe to say you have some incredibly interesting research projects and a ton of experience in machine learning too. So I'm so excited to hear from you. We're lucky to have you. Thanks for being here, Dr. Kerby.
Thank you, Holly. I'm happy to be here.
Thrilled to hear from you. Excited to hear from you both as a professor and as someone with expertise in machine learning, and that you see how it's already changed society and its potential to change it further. So first, I wanted to ask you about something. Earlier this month, I heard Captain Brian Erickson, who works for the U.S. Coast Guard. He's the chief data officer there. And he said something in a keynote speech that I wondered if you agree with or if you have a different opinion. He said that AI will become the norm, not the exception, but also that AI will not replace humans, like we saw in the intro, in the future, but humans using AI will replace humans not using AI. Do you agree or disagree?
Yes, I would say that in general, I do agree with him.
Awesome. What industries do you think might use AI more than others?
So I think that AI is transforming every field, but ChatGPT is a large language model, and as such, I think it will have the biggest impact on the language field, such as journalism, law, marketing, and coding, as computer code is a language.
So interesting. And do you think that eventually it could replace humans altogether?
This is a great question. I don't think that AI will replace humans, as in all humans. It may replace some tasks, but I don't see it replacing all humans. I think it will become more a tool for us to use. New technology is usually disruptive and exciting and scary. And as long as the change happens slowly enough or not too fast, then we can adapt to it. I also think that as a society, we need to discuss the role we want AI to play. And that's probably another huge discussion, but I'll put that out there.
And let's expand on that just a tiny bit. What do you mean by that? What role that it should play? Can you give us kind of an introduction to what that discussion would be?
Well, there might be things, for example, that we don't want AI to do. And I think that we need to be thinking about that, talking about that, then of course establishing regulations and laws saying, AI, there are limitations and constraints. So
that makes sense. Very fair. Well, as a professor, you have students of your own. Are you encouraging them to use AI or discouraging them? Is that something you're worried about from like a cheating or academic integrity standpoint?
So for me, I actually encourage my students to use it. And in fact, I show them how to use it, and I use it in class, live in class. So I also, though, make it clear that while I allow it in my class, that in other classes, it might be considered cheating, and that they need to watch out for that and make sure that they're following the rules of whatever class that they're in.
So do you have sort of a standard, like you need to have mastered this skill before you use it, or do you just recommend they use it however they like?
This is a really good question. Most of the classes that I teach are at a level where I want to teach students how to learn this tool, how to use AI, because I think that it will help them. But I do think that there's a level at which that tool should not be used. And I like to think of it as AI is like a really advanced calculator. So in grade school, when students are taking a times table test, they're not allowed to use a calculator. By the time they're in high school, a lot of math classes, in fact, will require a calculator. And as you become more advanced, you will require a graphing calculator, the kinds of tools that we utilize. And now students have laptops in class. So I see it as being kind of like that. There are skills that students need to learn how to think and how the foundations. But then once they have that, then they can learn to use tools.
Love that. That's such a great analogy. It's like a language calculator, basically. And it can help with learning to code too, right? Can you give an example of something you might tell your students to use it for?
Yes. So often in class, so as a computer scientist, we don't know how to code everything. We still have questions. How do you use this structure? How does this work? What's this error message that I'm getting? And frequently we would go to Google, and I will teach my students how to do this. They need to learn how to solve problems and find answers. But when you go to Google, you have to read through, you have to do the assimilation yourself, go through Stack Overflow, read, the forums and questions and what people are saying. You can kind of use ChatGPT. You can go put in that same prompt, and ChatGPT has assimilated that for you, and it will give you the answer. So it's a faster way to do that. ChatGPT will also generate code. So as an example, in one of my recent lectures, I went to ChatGPT and said, hey, can you build a program in Java that will perform a breadth-first traversal in a binary tree? And it spits it out. And then we critique it as a class, because what it spits out isn't perfect. I'm like, if you were to turn this in, you'd get a bad grade. This is, let's walk through what is useful about this and what is not.
Wow, that's so interesting. And you're so qualified with machine learning. Can you just explain in layman's terms, where does it get this data? How does it come up with these answers?
So for ChatGPT, it has scraped websites and all language, GitHub repositories for code, and it has assembled, I'm not sure the quantity of data, but absolutely massive quantities of data. I don't want to give a number to it, but and it puts all this, trains and learns on this data. So it's just out there. It's all the data that is out there. It learns on that. One note about it though is that it's not up to date because the model is static. So they release a new version every so often. So if you're trying to find information on something that's just come out in the last couple months, it won't have it.
That makes sense. Wow, man, I wish we could talk for hours about all my questions about ChatGPT, but I do want to get your perspective on whether you think the technology could have potentially negative consequences. So you work with it a lot. As it applies to nuclear engineering. Are there risks in that field particularly?
Yes, there are risks in that field. And let me maybe broaden this question because AI is not being implemented in the nuclear field yet. It's really still in the conceptual stage. There is risk in implementing novel AI too quickly, just in general. And I think that's true of new technology across the field. So there are many risks. Let me just mention two. One has to do with there being flaws, limitations, or malfunctions in the AI system itself. And these tend to show up after it's been implemented in a wide way. So an example of these would be when Apple first put out their facial recognition software, that it tended to recognize white males better and non-white and not non-female people less well, and they had to fix that. Another example would be the Boeing 737 MAX, the catastrophes there. Another example would be job application filters that several big companies did, that they found out that they tended to oversample from Anglo-Saxon sounding names and candidates from elite private universities. So again, they had to fix that. So there can be flaws and limitations and malfunctions in the model itself that have to be fixed. The second risk, which tends to come a little bit later, tends to lag further behind, is that there can be weak points in the AI system that a hacker can utilize to create flaws and malfunctions that might not have otherwise happened. And this part of the field is relatively new, but it is growing rapidly, and we're quickly developing some guidelines and standards.
So interesting. Holy moly. It's definitely a lot to think about. Wow. And you've mentioned the data that it grabs from, there's got to be, bias or sort of things that we might be concerned about in those data sets, right? How do we reconcile that with higher education if it's giving us answers and those answers come from biased data? How do we deal with that?
Yes, that is a great question, Holly. So models are going to kind of reflect the biases in the data that they create their models from. So as that data is everything that is here in society, then that tends to show there are going to be biases, and the models are naturally going to have the biases that exist within our world. There are things that you can do to mitigate that, but you have to very actively do them. Like I mentioned, the facial recognition, The real issue there was that the data set was not properly representative. So they had to increase, number of faces, the diversity of faces that the model trained on, and then it did better. So that's a long discussion, and maybe that's one little piece of it. There are ways that you can create models that are more equitable, but you have to work at it. And I would say one other thing that I see having an impact in this discussion as far as higher ed is that there can be discrimination in the models themselves, but then there can also be discrimination in who has access to it. And I also see learning how to use these tools being an important thing to do for the future. And I think that students with greater socioeconomic means will probably have greater access to these tools. And that is something in education that we can work to kind of level that playing field.
Something we're always working at to try to level with new challenges entering the market, right? That's so interesting. Wow, I wish we could spend a lot more time with you, but we've got to move to the next panelist. So stay put. We're going to bring everybody back at the end. Thank you so much for those comments.
Thank you.
So enlightening. So thank you so much, Dr. Kerby. Next, we're going to speak with Dr. Jen Schneider. Dr. Schneider is an Associate Dean of the College of Innovation and Design, which helps create the future Boise State through development and cutting-edge programs and workforce training. Jen's area of expertise is in communications with a focus on controversial environmental and technology issues. She's also a professor at Boise State. Welcome, Dr. Schneider.
What's up, Holly? Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here.
So excited to have you. Do you have a perspective on this issue as both a professor and an associate dean in different ways, or are they the same? How do you balance those two?
Well, I'm not currently in the classroom, but I can tell you what I'm seeing among faculty. And I think it's easiest to think about it sort of as a bell curve, right? So at one tail end, we have, I think, probably a smallish number of faculty who don't know what AI is and are not paying any attention to the advent of things like ChatGPT. And then at the other end of the bell curve, we have people like Dr. Kerby, who are either experts in computer science or in related fields, or who have sort of seen AI coming as hobbyists and understand the import of this tsunami that's kind of coming our way and are already integrating it into their classes. So we have a professor in business and economics here at Boise State who has never worked on AI and now just spends all of his time on AI in terms of prepping his classes and doing his research centered around that. So I think that's really interesting. Most faculty are in the center of that bell curve, and I would say they're sort of like keeping an eye on the approach of AI out of one corner of their eye. They know that their students are using it. They themselves are sort of watching the news about it. And I would say their major concern is very immediate and has to do with how they're going to deliver content in their classroom, how they prep students to use AI, and then how they avoid cheating. So the lengths of those tails are going to be different at different universities. You go to Stanford, they're probably going to be a lot more expertise sort of at that, AI engaged end of things. But I would say at Boise State, probably most state universities in Idaho looks something like that bell curve.
That's such an excellent description. Is there a consistent policy for students or for faculty or guidance at all at this point at Boise State?
So we have an AI task force made up of faculty and staff that was formed, I think in January, right around the time that news was really breaking about AI coming on the scene, in particular ChatGPT functionality. And that group put out a statement pretty quickly and I think set the tone for our campus in terms of, our knee-jerk reaction as faculty might be, let's ban this technology, or let's say that using ChatGPT or Dolly or whatever the platform is cheating. And that task force said, we have to think about academic integrity, but it's not the only thing. And so I think that is something that we're grappling with as a university. I don't think a one-size-fits-all policy is going to make any sense at all. It would be, I think, the analogy would be to say, using the internet is cheating, and we can't do that, right? This thing is already here. Our students are already using it, as we heard from Rakeb, and we just, like, as my boss likes to say, the bus is speeding down the highway and we're hanging on to the back as tightly as we can. But we're on the bus, right? It's going. And either we're going to be left in the dust or we're holding on tight.
And that's got to be a real challenge, is the speed of the technology and how it's changing itself, but then more users adopting it, more students adopting it, and faculty wanting to adopt it. So does that present staffing issues? Does it present changes to your curriculum? Do people does this have to be mandatory as part of your foundation for studies at BSU? What conversations are happening around those topics?
Yeah, those conversations are just starting. Again, I would say our early conversations were, with like our learning management system people, what kinds of technologies can we use to detect AI cheating, right? And so we had a group of really highly qualified, highly skilled technologists working on that. They did their work, 2 weeks, reported back. By the time they reported back, their proposed solutions were already, out of date, because the generative AI technologies are changing so rapidly. I mean, you can go onto any sort of tech forum, maybe not on Twitter anymore, but on your preferred social media site, and see dozens and dozens and dozens of applications of generative AI in particular. So I think universities are quickly realizing that sort of the cheating discussion is the very tip of the iceberg. And that, in fact, we need to start thinking about, okay, what does this mean for how we think about teaching? What does it mean for how we teach about learning? What competencies do our faculty and students need to have? How do we better partner with industry so that we are sort of staying at the leading edge of these developments? And I think, sort of the meta discussion along the lines of what Dr. Kerby was talking about is that AI is going to change society. It already is. It's going to change our politics. It's going to change our economics. It's going to change how your employees show up to work every day, for folks who are listening. And we, I don't think, have enough programs and enough curriculum developed in our Idaho universities to really prepare our students to be thinking critically in the way that they're going to need to be able to.
All great points. In the intro, we talked a little bit about how some companies are already laying off workers. So do you foresee entire industries or majors at colleges and universities becoming obsolete? Should we refocus? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a hard question, isn't it? Because I think there are a lot of areas that have been shrinking in the last decades anyway. There's, been a lot of students who have shifted to STEM areas, science, technology, engineering, math, or to business, and away from the humanities. And I suspect that there's a lot of humanities disciplines that are going to feel as if they're in the crosshairs as generative AI really comes on strong in the culture. There's so much sort of writing capability, for example, that could potentially be replicated or replaced by the sort of ChatGPT family. So I think we will see, and I think we need to start having more and better conversations around what that means and what the skills and competencies and modes of thinking that our students need to have are. I mean, I think we have to be thinking about evergreen approaches, right? Because you could teach about one technology, and again, a couple of weeks later, it will have changed. And so what are the sort of higher level skills that you want students to have? And I suspect a lot of those do come from the humanities. And so we have to be really thinking carefully and hard and not in a reactionary way about how we're going to meet these changes.
That's really thoughtful. I love that. What are your thoughts about how AI might affect access to higher education, or that it might create inequities?
So we already have pretty significant inequities in higher education, as you pointed to earlier, Holly. There are a lot of folks, including in places like Idaho, for whom college education is out of reach or is not of interest. We also nationwide have a sort of interesting political environment where, perceptions of the value of a college education are really polarized, with Republicans in particular increasingly seeing it as less valuable than Democrats do. So I think, again, we have these trends that are maybe somewhat separate from AI or ChatGPT, but I think ChatGPT and AI are going to join those streams and may exacerbate some of those challenges we're seeing in terms of access and preparation to be able to work in the new economy, to work with these new tools, to have these new skills. On the other hand, it's very similar to the debates we have about the internet, which is as bad as sort of things like social media might be for some people. They've also been really good for others, including, offering platforms for marginalized people to find community and to organize. So I think it'll be a mixed bag. It's a big enough technology, a complicated enough technology that it is going to be, there's no one story, I think, that will emerge about it.
All great thoughts. Well, this topic came about because you and I were at a conference together, and I said, "What's everybody talking about?" And you said, "Nobody can stop talking about ChatGPT and AI." So is it really on everyone's mind? Is this really something educators are very concerned about and chatting about in all circles?
Almost all. Again, I think there's the folks at that one tail end who are just going to continue to not pay attention. And who knows, they might be better off for it. But I think a lot of K-12 teachers, especially junior high, high school teachers, are very engaged on this topic. And a lot of higher ed professionals are, again, looking at it, trying to get up to speed themselves, trying to understand the implications and what it might mean for how we teach and how students learn. But keep in mind, these are really busy folks. Teachers are really overworked, as you know, and professors are too. And so it's sort of, I think, people are careful not to be drinking from the fire hose too much.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, again, just like the others, I wish we could sit here and chat about much more, because we've really only touched the surface of so many issues. But I sincerely appreciate your comments, and stay tuned. So we're going to come back to all four of you. We're going to move on to our next panelist, which is Brian Lincoln. Thank you, Dr. Schneider. So appreciate you. We have the pleasure now of hearing from Brian Lincoln, who is an assistant clinical professor of law at the University of Idaho, where he teaches courses in lawyering skills and international human rights. He earned his Juris Doctorate degree at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. And prior to his appointment at University of Idaho, Ryan practiced commercial litigation at firms in San Francisco and Kansas City. And he worked on human rights issues in Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Welcome, Dr. Lincoln. So happy to have you.
Hi, Holly. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm really excited to hear your unique perspective as a law school professor and some of the ethical considerations that might apply here, and some conversations maybe about lawsuits or whatever you might want to add. But I wanted to show you, I was just scrolling through social media, and you know how there's always so many ads that come up. And the other day, let me show you, I saw this, an ad for ChatGPT for law. And it was talking about how, lawyers can use AI apps for contract law. So the law profession is no exception to this technology, right?
Yeah, I'm not surprised that you saw that. It's funny. I was doing a little reading in the New York Times on this very issue about AI and lawyers, and it linked to an article from 2017 saying, is AI coming from lawyers? So, 5-6 years ago, even then this was a concern. So, but it's kind of fun to see that little option there.
And it's here. It's here. We can't ignore it, right? So
Yep.
I first wanted to ask you the same question that I asked the other two professors as to whether you think that AI and ChatGPT is something you're worried about from an academic cheating perspective, academic integrity. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, overall, I would say no. But to the extent that I do have any concerns, I think they're much more near term. Speaking just, for my own colleagues at my own institution, um, any cheating we're worried about is sort of because we are having to catch up with this technology. I know colleagues that are adjusting their tests or their test questions or the ways in which they're administering tests, really to try to minimize that teaching. But it's really just for now. I think as we're able to adjust our instructional methods and our approach in the classroom, and as we're able to sort of train students to use AI, which I think we'll have to do, I think my concerns fade actually. So I think it's a bit of a catch-up game for now, but I'm less concerned if I take kind of a long view of it.
Makes a lot of sense. Does the University of Idaho have a policy written, or is that in process? What are your discussions like over there?
Yeah, so the university as a whole, we have what's called a faculty working group. And so that's University of Idaho as a whole, and it's an interdisciplinary group that's really looking at different uses of AI. And one aspect of that is a possible policy related to use of AI. At our college law level, we have the same essentially working group trying to think about how to use it in the law school setting. But for now, we don't have any policy.
So interesting. And it sounds like that's the case for most colleges and universities, not only here in Idaho, but across the nation. Dr. Kerby mentioned that, we need to start a conversation about what are the ethics around that, or what are allowable uses. Do you have any thoughts around that as well? Or do you think that's a conversation we need to start with, or does that come later?
No, I mean, I think that should be part of the conversation from the beginning. And I think it's interesting, just speaking from the legal world, what I think of ethics as a lawyer, I guess, former lawyer now, there's rules of professional conduct that guide lawyers' behavior and actions. And so that's kind of where my mind goes immediately when I think of ethics. And as law professors, we train our students, we teach our students about these rules. We expect them to abide by them. We certainly expect them to abide by them in practice. And so I guess, my first thought is to look to the pre-existing rules and see what they might say about uses of AI. And there are some rules that I think already, like in their current form, would apply. So, for example, there are rules about competence and diligence. And so, I think to the extent that a practicing attorney, and this would probably apply to a student as well, is using ChatGPT or some other form of AI, and essentially like offloading lawyering tasks to the AI and then trying to pass it off as their own work, that's looks like that might violate those rules of competency and diligence. There are rules that apply to candor, so honesty and transparency to the court and to colleagues. And I think it's the same kind of thing to the extent that AI is being used to generate, ideas or certainly written text that an attorney or a law student is trying to pass off as their own, probably violates that duty. But I think what's also interesting is there's rules related to technological competency that actually require practicing attorneys to stay up to date with technology and to be able to use technology appropriately, at least at a basic level of competency in practice. And I think that's interesting because that would actually probably encourage attorneys to be up to date and skilled, at least to a certain level, in using either, whether it's ChatGPT or some more proprietary form of AI.
So interesting. Like they've got to go get their credits and take their AI courses. So is it need to know technology then, in your opinion? What do you think about that? Is it still maybe, or do you think we probably better start diving in?
So it's hard to say as to ChatGPT specifically. I don't know that it's need to know, but AI certainly. I mean, I think about even when I was in law school quite some time ago, aspects of legal research platforms that we used had embedded AI even at that time, and those programs have only grown. There are discussions about law firms, especially like large international law firms, developing their own kind of in-house AI. So there's almost this race amongst firms to develop particular platforms that will be useful to their particular forms of practice or their industries. So I do think AI broadly is certainly need to know, even if ChatGPT isn't particularly sort of suited to law specifically.
But it could be suited to law. I'm imagining, ChatGPT, give me all of the case law on derivatives for, just whatever
Yes. Yep.
you're litigating. There's got to be
Yeah,
so
for
many
sure.
options out there. It could be such an amazing tool. Well, I know it's been mentioned a little bit. We talked about how for now it's free. Most of these apps are free, but some of them are monetized. And both other professors mentioned that there may be some inequity there. Do you have any thoughts around that? Do you think that is a potential problem, and is it something that should be addressed by the college, or do we just kind of have to manage?
Yeah, I agree with what others have said. I mean, I definitely think there's certainly disparities built in once there's free versions as opposed to fee-based versions. And so I do think to the extent that we're developing policies, we need to have an eye towards those policies. I have a cohort of other professors that teach writing classes within our College of Law, and prior to sort of ChatGPT coming on the scene, we had just gone through a process of evaluating essentially like grammar and writing programs like Grammarly, and trying to decide whether we were going to allow those, prohibit those, require those. And this question of equity was one of our central concerns. And that question of free services versus pay services is one of those equity concerns. And so I think that translates exactly into the ChatGPT or AI scenario.
Such an interesting concept. Do you think that we need to have conversations about these ethical or allowable uses, maybe by industry or just as society as a whole? How do you think that would be best accomplished? Like, should the law school?
I guess the visual image I have is this sort of Venn diagram, right? It's hard to sort of completely separate industries from professions from society as a whole. And so I think to some extent we have to have them in kind of the micro level, right? Within certain industries, certainly within professions. I think of my lawyerly professional responsibility duties as well, but we operate within those industries and our professions sort of within society too. So I think there has to be this sort of interlocking discussion, as difficult and as complicated as that would be and is.
So I agree. That's awesome. Do you have students that are using it in your classes now, or your colleagues' classes?
I don't know about my colleagues' classes. I have used it in my, I teach a legal writing, lawyering skills class, and we've used it in a sort of informal way. And by that I mean we sort of played around with it in class, and I tried to show students ways in which it could be useful and ways in which it could appear to be useful but not actually be useful. So my very first classroom use was a bit of just a cautionary tale, so to speak. But I'm kind of in the process of bringing that much more into my classroom in the fall semester.
So interesting. I love that. So cool. There's, I'm sure, a million ways it can be used in law as well. And it's so interesting. I wish we could talk about just law school GPT for an entire hour, but we're going to run out of time soon. So I want to bring everybody back to the stream, and we're going to have one last little discussion here. But I wanted to note also in the introduction, you saw a video of what ChatGPT can do. And when we were structuring this episode, we actually asked ChatGPT to give us an outline and structure of a higher education series episode, and it gave us this structure, and that's really the format that we use to build this episode. So I don't think any of you were surprised, but I was surprised the level of the quality that it had. So interesting. We're for this final segment, we're going to have all of the panelists wrap up, and we're going to give you each 60 seconds an opportunity to quickly talk about one thing that a different panelist discussed that stuck out to you, and you can add your final thoughts. So I'll put a 90-second timer on, and let's go in speaker order. So Rakeb, let's start with you.
Yeah, what really stuck out to me is that like I was not very sure on how professors used ChatGPT. I was able to speak from my experience as a student and also my experience in almost falling into the trap of cheating using ChatGPT, which doesn't aid in learning at all, but also learning how to use it in order to aid my learning, which is what I'm here for as a student. So it was really great listening to like professors, like all your panelists talk about the way it's used and also how it's difficult to kind of like detect when someone is using ChatGPT because like it could be like that generating answer could be like was already like timeout because every time it's always different. It doesn't give you the same answer, and it's really difficult to actually realize who's using what and who's using it when. So that made me reflect on like students as well as like users are entirely responsible in the way that they use this technology or open AI in general. And I thought that got to me the most.
That's a really great point, Rakeb. Thank you. All of your insight was so helpful, and I think for all of us, it was really great. So thank you so much. All right, next let's go to Dr. Kerby. What are your final thoughts?
So I actually had things from all three speakers, and I'll watch the clock. I'll try to be quick. I wanted to say, Rakeb, the point of using ChatGPT to come up with a study guide for over several months was fascinating, and I will use it this summer for my summer group. And then Ryan, your comment about the professional conduct, and I thought we could create something like that for AI, I think, and I thought that was fascinating. And then Jen, your comments about the humanities and where do we go really, really resonated with me. And I think, I mean, artists and writers have had a tough go of it for a long time, and you know it's just almost getting harder. And somebody coming from, yeah, I love AI, but I do not want to see AI replace human art and music and literature or human interaction. And I think that's part of what we need to discuss and prioritize as a society, that we support the artists and writers in this creative part.
Great comments. So true. I agree. I could pull stuff from all four of you too. Just incredible insight. And I want to sit here and learn more about machine learning. We didn't even get to talk about, you know, how you can tell it to. I'll give one quick example. Someone was laughing on Twitter because they said, what are the greatest bike trails in Boise? And ChatGPT told them Holes Gulch was a great bike trail for beginners. And everyone was saying, that's way too hard. You can't, if you're a beginner, you can't do Holes Gulch. And so I just wrote, you are incorrect that Holes Gulch is a beginner's trail. It's very difficult terrain. And you know, it responded, I'm so sorry, I will not include that. And then I asked the question again, and it was not in the results. So it's so interesting how machine learning actually learns from you telling it when it's correct or wrong or those sorts of things. And we didn't even get to, you know, dive into that. There's so much more we could talk about. So thank you for all of your insight. And I wish we had more time. Next, let's go on to Dr. Schneider. I'd love to hear your final thoughts.
Yeah, well, thanks again for having me today. I've learned so much from participating. I just was listening so carefully to how Rakeb was talking about the ways in which students are using these technologies. And I think, just the facility with which that generation is stepping in to use these very easily without really any training or encouragement or support. It's here and it's happening. So it struck me that wouldn't it be amazing if we had educational opportunities for all students where even if they want to major in the arts or the humanities, to Leslie's point, they also have some basic training in sort of large learning systems or algorithmic biases, things like that, so that they have some of that literacy. And then same on the other side for AI folks, how important that those folks also have some training in ethics and the social side of things. So I think that's what's before us as universities is we'll need to build those pieces out and make those pathways possible for students and easy for students to engage in.
Such great comments. And I think it would be so valuable if the colleges and universities, even just on this panel, were able to discuss, here's what we found, here's what we're thinking, have some sort of, discussion there too. It would be very helpful, I'm sure, if all three of you have a, task force or whatever it may be. I'd love to see that. I think that'd be great. Well, our last one here, Dr. Lincoln, let's hear your final thoughts. So excited to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks again for this opportunity, and thanks to other panelists. It's just been a really fun way to spend a lunch hour. I think what really stuck out to me, Rakeb, was your story of using ChatGPT, and I think for so many of us that teach, we hope that our students will come away from our classes with some mastery of the subject matter, but more so, I think we hope that students leave our classroom as interested, engaged, curious, self-directed learners. And so hearing that that's like exactly the way that you're using ChatGPT was really inspiring and really encouraging. So I think that was what stuck out to me so much from the panel.
That's very well said. I'm very impressed. It's so awesome. Well, thank you, all of you. Thank you, Dr. Lincoln, Dr. Kerby, Dr. Schneider, and Rakeb for being part of this panel. It was nothing short of phenomenal, riveting discussion. And we want to again thank our presenting sponsor, Sparklight, for making this higher education series possible. It absolutely would not be possible without their support. So thank you, Sparklight. And thank you to the episode sponsor, Idaho's College Savings Program, Ideal. We're thrilled to have your support as well. We want to thank our media partners for airing this series on their platforms today: Idaho Education News, Idaho Capital Sun, the Idaho Press, and the Idaho Statesman. Thank you for your continued support of this valuable and educational content. We'd love to see you back here in a few weeks for our next episode of the Higher Education series. Thank you, panelists, and thank you to all of you for tuning in today. Bye.
Thank you.